All right, so we are live here tonight on this fine Saturday night to talk about the Selection Sunday slate of college basketball DFS. We have got 4 games left to talk about for DFS this Sunday. We have got the championship game in the A10, the championship game in the Big Ten, the championship game in the AAC, and the championship game in the SEC. So we've got 4 conference championship games here on Selection Sunday to break down for you. We are going to break all 4 of them down here on this episode, tell you what you can expect from each game, tell you kind of who you should and should not be targeting in your DFS lineups for each game, and just kind of, how we expect this slate to play out. So if you have any ideas for certain plays, any questions, make sure to let me know in the live chat. I'm still trying to figure out how to pull it up on my screen, but I can definitely still see it. So if you do post in the chat, I will make sure to mention it. And basically I'm here for you guys. I'm here to give you guys the information that you need to build some winning DFS lineups here for this Sunday slate. And I don't know about y'all, but it has been a great conference championship week for me so far. Have won the quarter jukebox on Wednesday, won the quarter jukebox on Friday, and had a pretty profitable early slate Saturday as well. So let's hope to keep that train rolling into Selection Sunday and hope to keep that train rolling into next week when March Madness starts. Now, before we go over the data itself, I do need you guys to do me a favor. Make sure you hit that like button and make sure you hit the subscribe button. The likes help me out a ton. It helps the video show up in searches. It helps the channel show up in searches. And I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate it when you guys do that and how much it actually does help me. Also, if you have not subscribed already, make sure you hit subscribe. We are closing in on our goal of 500 subscribers, and I want to get there before the NCAA tournament ends. And the only way I can get there is if more people like you watching hit that subscribe button. So please help me out. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let's go ahead and jump into it. So been doing my research tonight and been watching this ACC championship game between North Carolina and NC State. And man, this has been an electric college basketball game. Looking at my TV, I've got the TV on in the living room on it. Looking forward to seeing how that one ends. I would love to see the NC State Wolfpack get in the tournament because of, just how fun I find them to watch play with DJ Burns and DJ Horn. And so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into this Sunday slate. Like I mentioned, 4 games to break down. So if there's anything you want to hear from these 4 games, any suggestions and any plays you want to hear me talk about, let me know in the chat, because at the end of the day, I'm here to give you guys the information that you need so that way you can win some money in DFS. All right, so let's go ahead and kick things off. And let's go ahead and get started talking about game number 1. So game number 1 of this Sunday slate is going to be the A10 championship game between Duquesne and VCU. And if you had this being the A10 title game in your bracket, then you're absolutely lying, because I would not have in a million years pictured this being the A10 title game. I thought that VCU was going to get beat by UMass. Then I thought that Duquesne was going to get beat by Dayton. And then really I thought St. Joe's was going to beat VCU today, and they didn't. And then I kind of thought St. Bonaventure was going to beat Duquesne, and they didn't. So these 2 teams are here against all odds, and one of them is going to be going dancing thanks to a win here on Sunday. So this is the game in DFS that you are not going to want to be targeting. KenPom has this game projected to be 66-65 for a 131 point total, which is the lowest on the entire slate. Neither of these 2 teams really like to get up and down. Neither of these 2 teams really play a whole lot of games that are shootouts either, because they are so good defensively and not great offensively that there's just not likely to be a whole lot of points scored. There's not likely to be a big number of possessions either. These 2 teams have played once this season, and it was 69-59 in favor of Duquesne. But I do think you can kind of throw that result out a little bit on the VCU side, because Max Shulga, their do-it-all point guard, did not play in that game. So for Duquesne, in that game against VCU, Day Grant was their guy. He had 26 points and was their leading scorer, ended with 32.5 fantasy points on 8 for 17 from the floor. That's pretty solid for Day. And then Jake DeMichael had 10 points in that game, ended with 15 fantasy points. He was the only other Duquesne Duke who got into double figures. Side note, is there a least creative name than the Duquesne Dukes in terms of a school and mascot combination? I think that might be all-time least creative. Anyway, In that game, you only had Grant and DeMichael scoring in double-digit figures. Now, in their most recent game, they did not play Trey Williams in their game against St. Bonaventure on Saturday. I think that is important because it did switch up their rotation for their forwards. Fousseyni Drame, that's a hard name to say, moved into the starting lineup, played 29 minutes, put up 17 fantasy points, and that was while being 0 for 4 from the field. So he was quite dreadful offensively and still found his way to getting 17 fantasy points. So if Trey Williams is in fact out for Sunday's game, then I would think that Drame would absolutely be in play. There's not much information surrounding Trey Williams not playing on Saturday, other than the fact that pretty much they just said that he's out with an undisclosed injury. So I don't really know what to make of that, but just know that Drame did in fact start and he did see that minutes boost, and it still kind of made forward a jumbled mess. I kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday, how many forwards they play. A lot of them, like Wednesday night against Dayton. No, it was Thursday night when they played Dayton. Thursday night against Dayton was due to just all of them getting in foul trouble. David Dixon is a guy who plays at a supremely high usage rate, but doesn't play a lot of minutes, and he can pick up fouls very quickly. So he's a very high risk, high reward play. And then you still are going to deal with Dusan Mahorcic and Jacob Nikas getting minutes as well. So just a lot of guys getting minutes at that forward position that I think the only way I would want to play any of them is if we get information that Trey Williams is out and I can play Fousseyni Drame. Now for Duquesne, it is all about their two lead guards, Jimmy Clark and Day Grant. They are the only two starters with a usage rate over 20% in their game today. Jimmy Clark absolutely filled up the stat sheet, 18, 8, and 6, along with 3 steals and a block for 45 fantasy points. And that's kind of what he does, right? He is a do-it-all guy in terms of stats, high usage rate, high number of shots, and he's getting a little bit of a price dip to 7,700, and I think that actually makes him somewhat palatable as a play. But I would rather go with Day Grant. He is their leading scorer. He is their best offensive player. He generally leads them in shot attempts, and he had 39 fantasy points today against Bonaventure, courtesy of 27 points, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists, 10 for 15 from the field, 6 for 9 from 3. He's going to get a ton of shots, and quite frankly, anytime you can get a team's leading scorer at $6,700 on DraftKings, that's a situation that I want to buy into, and so I do think Day Grant is going to make my list of plays tomorrow. Now, Jake DeMichael, we mentioned him earlier as being the other guy who scored 10 points against VCU. But what's notable is that yesterday against St. Bonaventure, he was the only other Duke who played more than 29 minutes. Basically their 3 guards, Clark, Grant, and DeMichael, are the only 3 guys that played more than 29 minutes. DeMichael playing 34 against St. Bonaventure and putting up 16 fantasy points. He's not a high usage guy, but $4,900 on DraftKings, playing 34 minutes, he's an option. It's only a 4-game slate. There's not a whole lot of value out there. He is definitely an option to go with, and I definitely am going to have him in my player pool as well on this Duquesne side. Now, switching it on over to VCU, they are an interesting one because I don't really think you can look back much at their stats versus Duquesne the first time because Max Shulgin did not play. Max Shulgin is their best player. He's a point guard who will fill up the stat sheet all in a myriad of ways. He's kind of like their Jimmy Clark. And he had 41 fantasy points today against St. Joe's, was 10 for 11 from the field, 25, 4, and 3, along with 3 steals. So just big time performance against St. Joe's. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to keep it up in not as good of a pace matchup against Duquesne, a better defensive team against Duquesne, but it's $6,800. That's a very reasonable price tag to get to a guy like Max Shulgin. What's really interesting though, is that today Zeb Jackson led them in usage. That is not normally the case. He only did turn it into 22.5 fantasy points, but since Sean Bairstow started playing for this VCU team, since Joe Bamasil started playing for this VCU team, Zeb Jackson's usage rate had been going in the wrong direction. And then only when those guys got hurt did it start creeping back up in the right direction. So against St. Joe's, it was kind of nice to see, him actually be the leader in usage. 6 for 13 from the field, was 0 for 5 from 3 in that 22 fantasy point performance. So I don't think Zeb Jackson is a bad option either. The aforementioned Sean Bairstow is a guy that gets dual eligibility, and he hasn't been great from a fantasy perspective recently, but the usage rate is solid, and he is a guy who can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways. I think that Bairstow and Jackson kind of counteract each other. So when Jackson is going to get higher usage, that's going to be less for Bairstow. I would not recommend playing the two of them together. Now, what I do want to mention about the VCU game previously to when they played Duquesne is Bamasteel and Lawal were actually their two usage leaders in that game, and they both came off the bench to do it. Joe Bamasteel is a guy that feels like he's been around the A10 forever. I believe he started his career at George Washington before transferring to Oklahoma and then to VCU. And he is kind of a boomer bust option in fantasy, but he's a guy that he's going to have a lot of usage off the bench. You don't really know how many minutes he's going to play. You don't really know how it's going to turn out, but he's definitely got upside at $5,900. And then in my opinion, out of all their bigs, Toby Lawal is the best one. Just from watching this team play against Dayton twice, watching this team play UMass and St. Joe's this week, I think he's their best big, but they don't play him like he's their best big. And so his fantasy upside is limited by his minutes. But if there were ever to be a game where he played 30 minutes, his fantasy upside would be through the roof. But unfortunately, he is still competing for minutes with Fermin and Kuwani. And I kind of don't see any of them as playable because they really do eat into each other's minutes. All right, so that is game number 1, the A10 championship game. Let me know in the chat, is there anybody from that game that you guys are going to be playing in your DFS lineups, or is that just going to be a game where because of the low total, you bypass it completely? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this next game as well. This one should be a good one. We got Florida taking on Auburn, and these two teams like to get up and down, and they like to score points. So this is going to be a game you definitely want to target for your DFS lineups. So in this SEC title game, KenPom has it projected to finish 84-77 in favor of Auburn. That is a 161-point total, which is the highest of the slate. It is a rematch of a game earlier in the season in which Florida won 81-65. Now, it is worth noting that in that first game, Zion Pullen, Walter Clayton, and Riley Kugel all scored 19 or more real points in that game. Clayton turned it into 32 fantasy points. Pullen turned it into 33 fantasy points. Riley Kugel, it was his ceiling game against Auburn the first time they played, though. He was able to turn that performance into 32 fantasy points, 22 points, 4 boards, a assist and a steal as well. I believe that is the high he had all season. Not quite the highest he had all season, but one of his highest performances. And we talked about Riley Kugel before. He's really this boomer bust guy that you really don't know how many minutes he's going to play. He comes off the bench, but when he comes off the bench, he generally shoots the ball quite a lot when he's in there, and he can get you some rebounds and assists as well. Well, one thing you'll notice if you look at his game log, it is missing the game against Texas A&M that they played today. Riley Kugel was a surprise scratch from that game. I don't know if I would expect him to play in the SEC title game or not. Again, kind of like with the injury to Trey Williams, there's not a whole lot of information out there on it. So it's definitely going to be one where, since this is the early tip of this slate, you can get information as to whether or not he's playing before you determine whether you're going to play him. But if he doesn't play, the guy that was the beneficiary today against Texas A&M was Denzel Aberdeen. He was the hero today against A&M. I thought, just from what I saw of this game, he was great. Played 23 minutes, put up 30 fantasy points, 20 real points, 6 for 9 from the field. That is efficient. That is a great fantasy points per minute line. And that's a pretty solid usage rate, 22% usage rate in that game. So Aberdeen checks a crap ton of boxes that if Kugel is going to be out again, I would consider Aberdeen almost a lineup lock, because somebody has to play those minutes. And at $3,100, it doesn't even take him that many minutes and that many points to hit value. So Aberdeen is probably my favorite value play of the slate if we know that Riley Kugel is missing. Now let's talk about like the other guards. So Will Richard was great today, put up 27 fantasy points against Texas A&M. But he was terrible earlier in the year against Auburn. Only 7 fantasy points, was 1 for 5 from the field, only played 23 minutes. He's kind of just an up and down guy that's very shot dependent. He doesn't get a whole lot of peripheral stats. He's a decent rebounder, but doesn't really give you a whole lot else outside of that. And if the threes are falling, it's going to be a good fantasy performance. If the threes are not falling, it's not going to be. So I think he's a guy that I would consider more of a game stacking piece, because it's very likely that if he's knocking down threes, somebody else is going to be getting assists, and it's also very likely that somebody for Auburn is going to be scoring on the back end. Now, who would be getting those assists? Well, I think it would be likely to be Zion Pullen, who does lead this team in assist rate, and he is, in my opinion, their most consistent fantasy option. He is very high floor fantasy oriented guy, right? Like, he has not had a game under 26 fantasy points since February 24th against Vanderbilt. So I really like the consistency that he gives you. The high assist rate also gives him a little bit of upside, but not exactly as much as some other guys in his price range. But you do like the high floor, so he's certainly a cash game option at 7,400. And then Walter Clayton is their best scorer, in my opinion. He generally leads the team in shots. He's a guy that, is a little more volatile than Zion Pullen, but maybe has a little bit of a higher ceiling as well. Against Auburn the first time, he did have 32 fantasy points. So definitely a guy that I would consider also. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a high floor, you can go with Zion Pullen. If you're looking for a high ceiling, you can go with Walter Clayton. I do like both these Florida guards in this matchup against Auburn. That's a pretty good pace spot, with Auburn ranking in the top 60 in tempo. Now, Tyrese Samuel has hit 30 fantasy points in 3 straight games. I think he is a legitimate option also. And he hasn't needed a whole lot of minutes to get there. This Florida team really rotates their forwards quite a bit. So I do think you can get to Tyrese Samuel pretty easily. And if he does happen to play 30-plus minutes, then he's got legitimate 40-plus fantasy point upside. Not a bad play at all in Tyrese Samuel, in my opinion. Also, we got to talk about the center position. Alex Condon significantly outplayed Micah Handlogton today. Condon played 28 minutes and put up 26 fantasy points. That's a pretty solid fantasy point per minute rate. Micah Handlogton, the normal starting center, only played 12 minutes, only put up 6 fantasy points, was dealing with foul trouble as he had 4 fouls at the end of the game. If that's something that's going to continue, Alex Condon at 5,700 is pretty likely to be a pretty good value play. But again, it required Handlogton to get in foul trouble. And, there's a chance that going up against Johni Broome, he could end up in foul trouble again. The first time that they played Auburn, he did in that game with 3 fouls, but he did have 32 fantasy points. I think he did a lot of his damage in the first half of that game, though, if my memory serves me correctly. So definitely not a bad option in Handlogton, but you're definitely running the risk of him getting in foul trouble and losing those minutes to Condon. Moral of the story, I think if you were somebody who is, setting lineups with an optimizer, or, you're putting together optimal lineups, I don't think it's very likely that you should play more than one Florida forward between Samuel, Condon, and Handlogton. I think it's very likely that one of them has a big game and the other 2 do not. Now, on the Auburn side, they're an interesting one. They're quite the frustrating team to target in DFS because they play at a fast tempo. They're good at basketball, but they play so many guys that it's just frustrating to try to target, guys in DFS because no one player for them plays a big load of minutes. Johni Broome did lead them in scoring in that first meeting against Florida, but he only had 27.75 fantasy points. He only played 29 minutes, but that's like kind of the norm for him. Like, he just doesn't play a lot of minutes, and that kind of limits his fantasy ceiling. If there were ever a time to play him more than 29 minutes, though, it would be, an SEC championship game. So I would hope that Bruce Pearl can finally, let his starters roll out there and play the starters and give them a lot of minutes and give them the opportunity to shine in DFS. And if that happens, Johni Broome has an incredible ceiling, but I just don't really know how much you can bet on it if, he still isn't getting big minute totals. To kind of back up my point, Auburn ranks 8th in the nation in bench minutes. Like, there's teams out there that are bad. They're just trying to throw guys out there to see if they're any good that have more bench minutes than that. Auburn's like the only good team that is near the top in that bench minutes category. It's really frustrating. So if I was to play anybody from this Auburn team, like I said, I like the upside of Broome. I like what he has the potential to do if he does play a lot of minutes. But if I were to play anybody from them, the 2 guys that I know are going to play minutes are Jalen Williams and Denver Jones. Today against Mississippi State, Jalen Williams played 31 minutes, had over a 20% usage rate, put up 27.5 fantasy points. He's only $6,100 on DraftKings. That's very affordable for a guy like Jalen Williams, who can put up fantasy points in a variety of ways. And then Denver Jones, only put up 17 fantasy points, but he did play 28 minutes against Mississippi State. Some sites have had that as 29. So I would assume it's like 28 and then something. But anyway, took 10 shots, only put up 17 fantasy points, but the usage rate was solid. It was over 20%, and he was a very high usage player at Florida International. So if there's any guys that you can really bank on, it would be Williams and Jones, because they've shown the sign that they're going to play a ton of minutes. All these other guys, all this supporting cast, like, they're all going to play an indeterminate amount of minutes at an indeterminate usage rate and put up an indeterminate amount of fantasy points. If you're playing GPPs, you can take a shot at a lot of them. There's just not a lot of safety in any of these Auburn guys because of their very volatile minute totals. Baker Mazzara has had some ceiling games recently. Dylan Cardwell is Johni Broome's backup, so he's getting any minutes that Broome's not in. Cheney Johnson filled in when Jalen Williams was hurt. Aiden Holloway is a young guard with a lot of upside. Trey Donaldson and KD Johnson are high usage guards off the bench, but if none of them are going to play more than 25 minutes, then they're just simply not likely to hit value in DFS. And I cannot stress that enough with this Auburn team. So what I would recommend doing is taking your shots at 1 or 2 of them and hoping and praying that one guy is the guy that will play more than 30 minutes. All right, that does it for game number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and snip it off the audio here for the audio audience. let me know in the chat. Is there anybody who I've swayed your opinion on so far? Is there anybody who you would like me to go back and discuss? Is there anything you guys have for me? That is what I am here for at the end of the day, to kind of help you guys, get you guys the data that you need to build successful DFS lineups. So if there's anything you got for me, let me know in the chat, and I am here to help. I do promise you that. As we've gone on, it appears NC State is taking a little bit of a lead over North Carolina. That would be a big-time bid stealer for the NCAA tournament if that result holds. So definitely a lot of bubble teams sweating that one out. All right, now let's go ahead and get on to game number 3. So this one's juicy. The third game of the slate is the AAC championship game between Temple and UAB. And I can't help but feel like, I've mentioned here on the show before, I'm a UNC Charlotte alumnus, and my Charlotte 49ers, man, if they could have just scored the basketball against Temple, it could very well be them in this championship game, playing for a shot to go to the NCAA tournament. And it kind of hurts that it is Temple. Now, Ken Pom does have this game projected to be 75-69 in favor of UAB. This is a rematch of a game earlier in the season where UAB won 100-72, but that's not the juicy part. The juicy part is that is the game that got Temple investigated for point shaving, because there was apparently some really fishy stuff that was going on with betting lines, and all the statisticians out there were pointing to rebound rates and stuff like that as evidence that Temple might be point shaving. But either way, it's a weird situation, and it's totally just a sign of this incredible sport that we watch called college basketball, that Temple, amidst of a point shaving scandal, is in a conference championship game against the team that they're accused of shaving points against. So a very interesting situation here. It's worth noting, though, that game was an absolute blowout, 100-72. So on the Temple side, the guy who actually led them in scoring was Zion Stanford, who is a guy that does not play a lot of minutes generally. He played 22 minutes in that game against UAB, 20 points, 23 fantasy points in that game. He played 7 minutes today against FAU. So if you're really banking on that game for Temple, just don't. I think you can kind of throw out the stats for that first game against UAB because it was such a blowout. Now for Temple, Hyzier Miller is their best player. He's their leader in usage rate, and he is generally the guy that makes this offense go. If they are going to win this game, it is going to be because of Hyzier Miller. Against Charlotte, he kind of struggled from the floor, but because he does so much in the peripheral stats, he was still able to put up 26 fantasy points, which was not a great total, but it wouldn't have killed your lineup if the Temple Charlotte game was on that slate and you had played him. He put up 36 fantasy points today against FAU. It is not in the game log yet on DraftKings for whatever reason, but do know that it was 36 fantasy points against FAU. That's about 4.5x value, which is pretty darn solid. So he's a guy that definitely has to be in consideration. Now, what is also interesting, we've talked about all week long, and this has been a large pillar of how I have had a lot of success this week in this conference championship week, is how these teams are condensing their rotations. They are playing their best players more minutes. They are playing their bench players less, except Auburn, pretty much. And so you kind of can look at situations where, hey, this guy used to be a 25-minute player, and when he was a 25-minute player, he was an X fantasy point per game player. And so now he's going to play 35 minutes, then he's going to score more than X fantasy points, right? And there are two guys for Temple who have been that. Steve Settle is one of them. He played over 34 minutes today against FAU after playing 30 against SMU and 31 against Charlotte this week. And he has put up over 25 fantasy points in all of those outings, 33 against SMU, 29 against Charlotte. By my calculations, it was 27 against FAU. Not 100% certain on that if I did my math right, but still pretty doggone good. And then Jordan Riley is another one that, the SMU game, he did not play that many minutes, but played 30 minutes against Charlotte, played big time minutes today against FAU, put up a double-double also. So he's another guy that has a little bit of my interest at 6,300. So just those big three for Temple are the main guys that are going to have my interest, just because they're going to play huge minute totals. They're going to have big usage rates. They're going to be the three guys that I'm going to focus on. Sam Hoffman does, in fact, start for this team, as does Matteo Piccarelli, but they don't play a ton of minutes. They don't have a ton of usage. Not super interested. Jaleel White and Shane Dezzoni are high usage, high variance players off of the bench, who I do think that you can go with, but they're not really secure in their minutes. They're not really secure in their fantasy point totals. But when they're out there, they're going to be out there doing work while they're out there. They're going to be shooting the basketball. They're going to be getting you rebounds and assists as well. So Not bad options, but definitely more upside GPP type options as opposed to like cash game high floor type options. All right, now we got to talk about the UAB side, right? So it's worth noting that, when they scored 100 points in that game against Temple, pretty mumuch everybody ate. Yaxel Landeborg had 50 fantasy points in that game. Alejandro Vasquez had 34. Eric Gaines had 41. And Christian Coleman had 32. That's what happens when you score 100 points, is you have so many guys hit value in DFS. Would I recommend playing 4 UAB guys again? Probably not. However, is there a chance that 2 or maybe 3 of them can get there? Absolutely. So Alejandro Vasquez is kind of the story for this UAB team right now, though. He got ejected for throwing a punch, and I'm putting quotation marks around that because I didn't think it was that egregious against Wichita. He got ejected after 6 minutes, only put up 3 fantasy points. Came back today against South Florida, came off the bench because apparently their coach didn't want to interrupt the mojo that they had after beating Wichita. Still played 29 minutes, still took 13 shots, still put out 30 fantasy points, still led the team in usage in 27%. So if Vasquez is going to lead the team in usage at only $5,200, that's a really solid option in DFS. And I think that the pricing algorithm is incorrectly pricing him because of that ejection against Wichita. So I really do think he's going to be a very popular value play, but I think also a very sound value play. If you are somebody who doesn't like to play guys with high ownership, then I don't think Alejandro Vasquez would be the guy for you. I said this on one of my episodes earlier in the week, but I am very rarely a guy to criticize someone as a bad play in DFS. And the reason why is because this is a crazy sport, right? It's truly unpredictable. And sometimes on paper, it might look like somebody's a bad play, but guess what? If nobody plays them and they're 2% owned and then they end up going bananas, then you're going to want them on your roster, right? Whereas the other can also be true, where there's some people who kind of overthink it in DFS and say, okay, this guy is way too obvious of a play. He's going to be 40% owned. I can't play him. And then everybody at the top of the leaderboards in the optimal lineup has him in their lineup because he was just that good of a play, right? And so I think Vasquez fits in that second category where he's going to be supremely highly owned, but he's also a really good play because of the usage rate that he carries at such a low price tag with a good matchup. Now, after that, today, Yaxel Landeborg was second on the team in usage at 26%, and he is just a double-double machine, 4 straight double-doubles, does not need a ton of shots to put up a lot of fantasy points. Against Temple, he did have that 50 burger, so that's pretty good. And I'm definitely willing to go with Yaxel Landeborg, even though now that Zach Edey's not on the slate, y'all, he's the highest priced player on the slate. And so I do think that's going to lead to a little bit of increased ownership. So I think a lot of people on this slate are going to start their build with Landeborg and Vasquez and try to make the rest work from there. So if you're looking to do that, you kind of want to find another way to make your team a little different, or, maybe just lean into it and just stack another UAB guy, stack a few Temple guys, and hope the game just goes bananas. Now, after that also, Eric Gaines was third on the team in usage at 24% today, put up 36 fantasy points. It's his 5th straight fantasy performance over 36 fantasy points. That's really good. $8,000, really solid price tag, really safe play. Really do like Eric Gaines on this slate. Ephraim Johnson was really good today, but it kind of came out of nowhere. He played 36 minutes, only took 10 shots, put up 28 fantasy points. He kind of has these random ceiling games, and there's never really any rhyme or reason for when it comes or why it comes. But if you're playing enough lineups in GPPs, maybe you might want to fade Alejandro Vasquez and give a few shots to Ephraim Johnson, maybe a few shots to Daniel Ortiz, who started today in place of Vasquez as well. Because they do have these random ceiling games, and there's definitely a pathway to those two guys having ceiling games. And so I definitely don't mind them as plays, but they're not guys that I would call core plays or anything like that. Now, Christian Coleman did start again today against South Florida, played 26 minutes, put up 23 fantasy points. He has been really good since entering the starting lineup. He is definitely a guy who I'm going to be considering for my lineups. I think $6,000 is about the right price tag. It is worth noting, though, that Javian Davis did play slightly less minutes than him today, but they did play a combined 50 minutes, so they were out on the floor together. So I definitely think that Javian Davis, I kind of combined both of his names there. Javian Davis is not totally out of the question as a bad value play either. All right, last game of the day and the traditional last game before Selection Sunday, Wisconsin taking on Illinois. This one is a pretty solid total as well. This one, KenPom has projected to be 79-77 in favor of Illinois. This is a rematch of a game earlier this season where Illinois won 91-83, and that would be the highest total on the slate if that were how it would transpire. That's 174 points. That is quite high. So there's definitely a chance that this game absolutely ends up being one that ends up shooting out. And it's because of Illinois, not because of Wisconsin. Wisconsin ranks outside the top 300 in tempo, according to KenPom, whereas Illinois ranks 57th. So this is definitely a big pace-up spot for the Badgers. Illinois is going to look to increase the number of possessions in this game, and that's definitely going to be the driver of this game as opposed to Wisconsin. Now, in that first game against Illinois, Wisconsin only played their top 6 guys double-digit minutes, which is their normal starting lineup of Hepburn, Klesmit, Storr, Wall, and Crowell, with John Blackwell coming off the bench. That's their top 6. Those were the only 6 guys who played double-digit minutes in that game against Illinois. AJ Storr led them in usage in that game. And we've talked about Storr before. If you were here on the live stream last night, you kind of heard me mention this as well. But Storr only put up 17 fantasy points in that game against Illinois, despite leading them in usage rate, because he was not that efficient from the floor. He was 4 for 12, and he was not doing a whole lot in terms of peripheral stats, only 3 boards, only 1 assist. So if you want AJ Storr to have a ceiling game, you're going to need it to be like today against Purdue, where he took 23 shots and where he got 6 boards. And so that's kind of a combination for where AJ Storr is going to be able to put up a ceiling game is, does he get an absurdly high number of shots and make a decent amount of them? And then does he actually get you some rebounds and assists as well? At $7,000, he did get quite the price hike, but I'm pretty confident that this is the guy who's going to lead Wisconsin in usage in a pace-up spot against Illinois, and that makes him a decent piece to look at as a game stacking option. Now, after that, Tyler Wall was the guy that had the ceiling game against Illinois the first time. He had 35 fantasy points in that game, was 9 for 14 from the field. Against Purdue today, he only played 17 minutes, and this is coming after only playing 24 minutes against Northwestern and only playing 22 minutes against Maryland. In the game against Purdue, I did not get to watch this full game, but he was questionable heading in due to a knee injury, and he dealt with foul trouble. He fouled out in 17 minutes. So is this something you can go back to? Like, I don't know the right answer, yes or no. I do know that he's at a very reasonable price tag at only $6,200. I do know that he smashed against Illinois the first time they played. If that knee is healed and if he can stay out of foul trouble, Tyler Wall could absolutely smash again, but that is 2 pretty big ifs. After that, Stephen Crowell's a guy I'm not really interested in either. He dealt with foul trouble today against Purdue also, only put up 17 fantasy points, only put up 8 fantasy points against Illinois as he dealt with foul trouble in that game also. So just a guy I'm really not interested in, especially at his absurd price of $6,500. If you were $5,500, I would definitely be interested. Chucky Hepburn was great against Illinois the first time, 28 fantasy points. However, here's my word of caution with Hepburn. That was coming in his run where he did not have that high of a usage rate. He was not taking a ton of shots. He was just being really efficient in terms of his rebounding and assisting, as well as getting a lot of steals. So could that continue? Yes, against Purdue today, it absolutely continued. He put up 37 fantasy points on 12 shots. So definitely a guy that I would consider as a game stacking option because he does put up so many rebounds, assists, and steals that if the possession number gets up in this game, that's just more opportunities for him to put up those peripheral stats. So Chucky Hepburn, not a bad option at all. After that, Max Klesmit was great today against Purdue, put up 30 fantasy points. He was the guy that when everybody thought Hepburn and Wall were sitting, they kind of jammed into their lineup, and then it turned out that Wall and Hepburn were active, and Klesmit still ended up being the play, putting up 30 fantasy points. So I definitely think he's an option again. He's been outstanding for this team in the Big Ten tournament, and if he can kind of keep that up, then I think he's a pretty good option. His performances in the regular season definitely left a lot to be desired, but he's just been good for them in the Big Ten tournament, and he could be on his way to winning, player of the tournament if he does, in fact, finish this off with a win for Wisconsin. And I think that they have a very good chance to do so. I didn't think they were going to get by Purdue today, but they did. And if you can get by Purdue, you can get by anybody in the Big Ten. John Blackwell did play a decent amount of minutes today, played 16. He played a decent amount of minutes against Illinois the first time, 24. But I'll just call a spade a spade. I think he's a little overpriced. He had a run of 3 really good games that really bumped up his price tag, and now he's at a price that he doesn't deserve to be at $5,100. I think he's a little overpriced. But again, kind of like what I said earlier, nobody is going to play him. So if you want to take a shot at a really low-owned John Blackwell, who clearly has showed some upside this season, not a bad ownership game theory type of play. Now on the Illinois side, They're pretty interesting. So here's what I mean by that. All season long, I've kind of been making my stand on with these two Illinois guys. It's either Domask or Shannon. It's very rarely both. Well, in the Illinois game the first time, it was a Domask and Shannon game. Terrence Shannon in that game had 24% usage and put up 37 fantasy points. It's pretty good. It's over 4x value. Marcus Domask in that game had a 33% usage rate, put up 49 fantasy points, 31 real points in that game for Marcus Domask. So both of them hit 4x value. And when you go back and look at the game logs, they have hit 4x value together in the same game in 3 out of the last 6 games. So I don't necessarily think it would be playing for first place in a GPP, but can you conceivably put Shannon and Domask in the same lineup and hope that they combine for 57% usage again, like they did the first time against Wisconsin? Absolutely, that's a possibility. I like them both as plays. Shannon was great today against Nebraska. Took 22 shots, put up 50 fantasy points, was great defensively as well. And then Marcus Domask was pretty solid today as well, even though he wasn't elite as a scorer. 5 for 11 from the field, and then put up 38 fantasy points off of 16 points, 7 boards, and 8 assists. So definitely, two guys that you got to consider here are Shannon and Domask. Now, Coleman Hawkins today was just kind of okay. And against Wisconsin earlier, he was just kind of okay. Put up 27 fantasy points against Wisconsin, put up 24 fantasy points against Nebraska. Today, he's gone a while without a ceiling game. And he is a guy who can explode for ceiling games. He's a really good athlete at the center position. Conventionally, I think he's the type of athlete that could give Wisconsin's bigs trouble. So I think he's definitely a high upside play and definitely a pivot off of everybody who just listened to my advice and went with Shannon and Domask in their lineups. Now, after that, the guy that I really like the most on this team is Ty Rodgers. He is their best wing defender, in my opinion. And in the Big Ten tournament, they've played him 32 and 33 minutes, and he is not disappointed in either of those 2 games, putting up 29 fantasy points in both games. If he's going to continue playing 30-plus minutes, he's going to continue being a great option in DFS. And at $5,500, I think the price is right that I'm probably going to be rolling out Ty Rodgers. Like I said, I think they really need his defense. And so that's going to be what keeps him on the floor. And if he is on the floor, he's going to put up fantasy points. Had 13 rebounds today against Nebraska, which as a wing, that's really insane. Dane Danger kind of burned me today. He was one of my core plays today. And I thought going in that he had shown that they're going to play him more minutes in the Big Ten tournament. He had a high usage rate in the last 2 games. He had good production the last 2 games in only 15 and 20 minutes. And my thinking was, hey, Nebraska plays a big lineup. Why would they not play him more against their big lineup and go big lineup themselves? Well, they did not. They only played him 6 minutes. He did nothing out there. He was pretty much just getting his cardio in for those 6 minutes and put up 0 fantasy points. Big letdown. Can you go back to him on Sunday? Possibly. I mean, he's a guy that, like, if you go back and look at his game log, you look at his usage rates, he's a guy who has a huge usage rate, and the minute totals are just super, super inconsistent. So he's a guy that nobody's going to go back to on Sunday because he just burned everybody on Saturday. So I don't think he's the worst option in the world, but just know that there's no safety. There's no security. He can give you a goose egg. And if you're willing to take that goose egg from Dane Danger, then go for it. I actually was able to cash in multiple lineups today where I had the goose egg from Dane Danger. But just I was able to get the other plays right so much that I was still able to min cash. But like, you don't want to just min cash. You want to be able to win big time in GPPs, right? Now, after that, Luke Goody, I think, has a little bit of interest from me. Came in today against Nebraska, played 15 minutes, which is more than what he had done recently. Took 9 threes, hit 4 of them. Also got 6 boards when he was out there, which is uncharacteristic for him. So look, if he's going to come out there and just chuck threes while he's out there, it's not hard to hit value at $3,300. So I think he is a guy that can definitely be like a sneaky punt play here on this slate at $3,300. All right, so that does it for all 4 games. And we're making really good time, y'all. It's only 10:55, but we'll be able to be done with this before 11. That's kind of an upset considering how long the previous live stream has gone. So looking in the chat, Jim says, I have 3 tickets into the 400K qualifier, trying to figure out a strategy. Most lineups I make will have 1 man with 0 FP. I use an optimizer and hand build. I have a hard time with low dollar guys. Okay, so if you have a hard time with low dollar guys, then using an optimizer is a good way to go, especially if you're making multiple lineups. But what you're going to want to do, though, is make sure that your projections So when I use Fantasy Cruncher, I am doing mostly my own projections. They're not like a super science, but like I set the projection to get the guys that I want in my player pool into my lineups, if that makes sense. So what I generally do is I go down the board and I look for the guys that are playing a lot of minutes, because if they're playing a lot of minutes, they're going to put up fancy points. I also look for guys that might be playing due to somebody else's injury, because those guys are generally going to see boosted minutes and get a lot of fancy points. So I would ignore most guys that have a 4 in front of their name. I am completely ignoring, like I'm not even like allowing them to be generated into my lineups, if that makes sense. And I'm only putting in good projections for the guys that I want in my lineups. So like for this slate, I have not done this yet, but like looking at the guys that are below 5K, DeMichael is a guy who's going to make my player pool. Ephraim Johnson, the guy who's going to make my player pool. After that, Daniel Ortiz, I will look to get a little bit of. And then let's see. Luke Goody, I'm definitely going to look to get a little bit of. And then Aberdeen from Florida, I'm going to look to get a little bit of. Now, I might expand that list a little bit, as I start actually sitting down and doing the projections and running the optimizer. But, I keep it pretty small with guys in the 4 and 3K ranges that I know are going to get minutes, that I know are going to be a factor in their games. And so that's how I think you can avoid getting those zeros if you are able to filter out the guys you do and do not want in your lineups, especially if you're using an optimizer. Get rid of all the guys you don't want. Get rid of all the guys that don't really have any kind of security. So I hope that explanation answered your question. I hope that kind of gives a good rundown of a good process for that. Next week at the NCAA tournament, we're going to have a ton of guys in the 4 and 3K range that, the projections and the data is going to not really know what to do with, because it's a lot of teams that we haven't seen all season. So, having a strategy like that where how to filter out guys you do and do not want, it will definitely help you going forward into the NCAA tournament. All right. So, that's pretty much everything I've got here, guys. I don't want to call it regular season, but last slate of conference championship week and really the last opportunity to play college basketball DFS before the NCAA tournament. I know we will have a Tuesday and a Wednesday slate. I do believe the NIT will still have a Tuesday slate as well as the first 4. And then Wednesday night will be the same. So it'll be interesting to see those as well. But like, this is like the last big push before the NCAA tournament, because it is Selection Sunday. Now, let me go ahead and get all the housekeeping stuff out of the way. If you guys have any more questions, drop them in the chat and I will make sure to get to them. You got any strategy questions and any plays you want to talk about, let me know, because like I've said time and time again, I'm here for you guys. I'm not doing the live for me. I'm doing the live for you guys. So as we head into the NCAA tournament, the schedule for next week for me, tomorrow night, I'm looking to go live again. Be on the alert for a notification from the YouTube page and from the Twitter as well. I'm looking to go live and just break down the bracket, initial thoughts, initial reactions, preview the first 4 game matchups I like, matchups I don't like, and just kind of go from there. That'll be tomorrow night. Monday, we will have the full bracket breakdown show with a guest, like we did last year, and it was very successful, very well received. And so we're going to have that again on Monday. And then we'll still have the golf show for the Valspar Championship, either Sunday or Monday. I'm trying to figure out when that one's going to fit in. But then Tuesday and Wednesday, we will have the DFS previews for the Thursday and Friday DFS slates for the first round of March Madness. Last year, DraftKings was kind enough to get the salaries out to us for the Friday slate before Wednesday. So that way it was very easy for me to record the show Wednesday night. And then Thursday night, I could just enjoy watching the tournament. And then Friday night back at it with the Saturday slate. And then Saturday night back at it with the Sunday slate. So we're going to be having shows pretty much every day next week that are college basketball oriented. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks for updates on there. And then also, I cannot recommend this one enough. Join the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. And we've got a lot of smart people in there who play a lot of DFS. The college basketball chat has been jumping recently. We've had a lot of guys have some GPP wins. A lot of guys have some success. And it's because we're in there all day chopping it up, bouncing ideas, bouncing plays off each other. And a lot of us end up on not the same lineups, but like we end up kind of talking up a lot of guys, and one guy will just end up on the right combination of them, and that's the lineup that wins GPPs. So definitely, if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, if you are looking for people to bounce ideas off of, if you're looking for just a community to sweat it out and enjoy talking DFS with, Fantasy Core Discord is a place for you. It's going to be jumping in there for March Madness week, and I'm really looking forward to it. And the more members, the merrier. I'm always happy to see all the other members of the Discord win. Today we had quite a few in the early slate on Saturday, so just makes me happy to see a lot of other people that we have correspondence with winning and winning often in college basketball at DFS. All right, so one last pitch. So if you do want to know who actually makes my lineups for this Sunday slate, as well as every other college basketball DFS slate, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/MikesMoneyPicks. I write a full article for every college basketball DFS slate where I profile my core plays, as well as my lineup strategy and attack strategy for the slate. Now, I have had a few instances this week because we've had double slates where had something come up and didn't get to do the full article for every single slate, but you do get the core, you do get a well thought out, well researched core for every single slate, and the article for just about every slate. And pretty much there's not a whole lot of people doing that for college basketball DFS. And I do think that getting the information from me can help you build your own process. I can't just guarantee that you can just plug in that core and win every GPP. It's not that easy. But I do think that you can get information from somebody who does a lot of research, does have a lot of data on this stuff, and get better at your own process for college basketball DFS. Because at the end of the day, I think that's my strong suit. Is I think I grind information and data more than pretty much anybody who's doing this. And in terms of actually playing the DFS lineups, that's actually not my strong suit. I think my strong suit is knowing all the information, and which makes it hard to kind of put all that information into one good lineup. But this week, all that information has paid off, and it's been a great conference championship week, and I'm looking to finish it off strong here on this Sunday slate. All right, so with that being said, y'all, it is 11 o'clock here on the East Coast. Hopefully have given you guys plenty of information that you need to build these winning DFS lines for this Sunday slate. I am super excited about Selection Sunday, super excited about the NCAA tournament. Cannot wait for it, super stoked. And like I said, I'm going to be on here all next week, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and it's going to be a blast. And seeing Jim in the comments, yes, thank you for mentioning that. I'm happy to help. I'm super glad to have you as part of the community. I know you're in the Discord as well, and it's been a blast being in that Discord the past few weeks. So just best of luck to you. Best of luck to everybody else as well tomorrow on the slate. And as we go into the NCAA tournament, best of luck to you guys. Thank you guys for watching to this point, and I'm going to go ahead and end the stream right here. Best of luck to you guys. See you guys next time.